Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Vieira, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1918 influenza pandemic, also known as the Spanish flu. The flu virus was isolated and identified in 1931 by Richard Chope. However, many medical historians can trace probable influenza outbreaks all the way back to ancient Greece. Historical Greek writings suggest a potential influenza outbreak in 412 BC. Flu viruses fall into three broad categories: A, B, and C, with A and B causing the annual flu in humans. Furthermore, influenza is classified by two glycoproteins, hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, which are abbreviated H and N respectively. H has 18 potential antigens and N has 11. For example, H1N1 represents the combination of glycoproteins for the Spanish flu. If this sounds familiar to you, it was also the combination for the swine flu that caused media hysteria in 2009. Antigenic shift is responsible for seasonal flu because new varieties of flu are continually generated, which is part of the reason why a new flu shot is needed every year. Nonetheless, the Spanish flu ravaged the globe in 1918. It is estimated that over one half of the world's population became infected and over 40 million people died as a result. The Spanish flu had a 2.5% mortality rate versus a less than 0.1% rate for normal years. Surprisingly, the Spanish flu is particularly lethal among young people with strong immune systems. This is because their immune systems reacted severely in cytokine storms, which initiated severe flu-like symptoms in patients. In addition, flu-like symptoms were often accompanied by pneumonia and/or pulmonary edema due to secondary bacterial infections. Contrary to the name Spanish flu, evidence suggests that it actually originated in China. Reverse RNA sequencing today suggests that it comes from Asian waterfowl. It is suggested that the disease was spread globally by the Chinese Labor Corps, which sent over 100,000 people to aid the Allied war effort. By 1918, World War I was in full swing, and troop movements coupled with trench conditions catalyzed the spread of disease across the globe. The name Spanish flu actually comes from the war. Powers from both sides withheld reports of the flu due to concerns over how it would affect morale. Spain, a neutral country, had no reservations in publishing the extent of the disease, and thus the flu took its namesake. In addition, it was thought that the King of Spain himself was afflicted during the outbreak. The first instance of flu in the United States comes from an outbreak at Camp Funston in Fort Riley, Kansas, where nearly 100 U.S. soldiers were infected. This number spiked to 500 one week later. It's important to mention that the flu came in waves, and the second flu was confirmed to be from England, and interestingly, was spread to Africa via the merchant ship the Mantua after arriving in Sierra Leone. On the right, here is a newspaper article just depicting the severity of the disease. The article highlights the shortage of undertakers and coffins in the United States. I thought that was quite interesting. The rapid outbreak of disease and war casualties caused a shortage of medical personnel and hospital space. As a result, many people turned to drugstore remedies, and local governments implemented policies to combat flu. People tried ineffective topical creams and mixtures of water, salt, and coal oil, for example. Remember that the sulfanilamide disaster didn't occur until 1937, thus the market was still fraught with misleading medicinal claims. When people did finally get to see a doctor, they were often prescribed alcohol. In addition, the government suggested people seek fresh air to avoid the disease, which is eerily reminiscent to miasma theory, which we studied earlier in the course. The newspaper article to the right is hard to read, but it echoes the same points. It says, "Get the air" is the health department's slogan. Get all the fresh air you can. Stay outdoors more than ever. Let the outdoors into homes, offices, and workshops. Fresh air will prevent the flu. It will cure it. And later they talk about alcohol and the alcohol shortage, saying, "Not a drop of liquor can be bought from Pittsburgh to the New Jersey line except from prescription from drugstores. This is to prevent people from gathering in crowds. Down in Virginia, officials are turning over confiscated moonshine whiskey to druggists for the flu prescriptions." I thought that was really interesting. I thought this newspaper clipping was a great example of pharmaceutical advertising before the regulation of medicinal claims. Here we have a drug known as Bahani being advertised as a cleanser and will help your body fight the flu better. Classic example of snake oil we saw in the early 20th century. Outside of medicinal remedies, local governments often implemented a variety of policies to curtail the spread of disease. Um, Quarantine, school closures, and the banning of public gatherings were often imposed, and we saw an example of the ban in public gatherings on the last slide with the temporary prohibition on alcohol sales, which was meant to deter people from going to stores. In addition, masks were handed out, which would have been fine if influenza were caused by bacteria. However, the masks were ultimately too porous for viruses. This example characterizes our lack of understanding of viruses during this time period. And the newspaper article to our right, yet another newspaper article, it cites the quarantines in Kansas following the infection of towns. And Kansas is sort of ground zero for the disease in the first place. Only doctors and nurses were allowed in the homes of the sick. Lastly, it's worth mentioning the progression of disease treatment throughout the 20th century and early 21st century. Influenza was characterized in 1931, and vaccines were developed in the late 1930s and 1940s for the flu. Early vaccines were kind of rough because of antigenic shift, and it was often hard for researchers to catch up to new forms of the flu. However, today we're on top of it, and we have flu vaccines coming out every year. The advent of penicillin in 1929 also helped, not with influenza specifically, however, the secondary bacterial infections that caused pneumonia and edema. And so today, while the flu might be something of an inconvenience and something we can readily prevent with vaccines, back in 1918, it was responsible for widespread chaos and disaster. So I'm glad we live in the era of modern medicine. Thank you all so much.